we start with the discussion document on the second transition. I think the first thing to remember is that this document is not an ANC policy document. Mm-hmm. It is a policy discussion document.
Yeah.
And therefore it is correct that ANC members and ANC leaders are articulating different positions on what is essentially a discussion document, which means the final position on this discussion document and other discussion documents will be taken not at the policy conference, because remember, the policy conference itself takes decisions, but those decisions are not binding on the ANC until they're endorsed by the National Conference in December in Mangaung, and therefore the final decisions will be taken by the National Conference in December. But secondly, I think what we have been trying to do, every time the mouth of an ANC leader seems to be about to move, is to see whether such an ANC leader is expressing lack of interest or interest in the presidency of the ANC as a candidate.
Do you think it's cold in the ANC these days?
I do think that ANC has generated more heat than light in the more recent past, so they can't experience the cold. But in the policy conference and in December, ironically, when it is summer, they may also face perhaps the discontent of the winter if they don't provide a clearer policy position that begin to address poverty, inequality, and all other deep structural issues that were not captured well in the first phase.
Because I just want to know, for instance, the disagreement about the second transition document. Should that be an issue at all? I mean, of course, you heard on Thursday, Deputy President Kgalema Motlanthe saying that, as far as is concerned, it's not a very clear document and so on. But the very next day, President Jacob Zuma defending it. And, of course, we've also heard over the weekend the General Secretary of the ANC defending this particular document. Is that an issue at all for you, Professor?
It is an issue to the extent that these disagreements perhaps are giving us a preview of what is to happen between now and December and what is to happen in the policy conference. But what cannot be contested is that all different policy proposals, be it the Youth League on nationalization or appropriation of land or COSATU or NUMSA, all of them, and the second transition document, all agree that the first 18 years of our democratic transition seem to have focused more on putting down the political infrastructure and all that comes with transition. And now the issue of transformation, which addresses social and economic issues, have become more urgent than before, because even when South Africa enjoyed sustained economic growth, this did not impact on structural issues, unemployment, inequality, and all the legacies of the past in terms of the distribution of wealth. And that in itself, whether you are talking to different permutations, is an indication that it's no longer just a choice of leaders, it's a pressure from below.
All right, let's welcome also on the line Sihle Zikalala. He's ANC's National Executive Committee member as well as KZN Provincial Secretary. Morning. I just would like to get your take then on the ongoing disagreements about this particular document, second transition. Kgalema Motlanthe last week calling it smatterings of Marxist jargon. What's the view of the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal?
Well, one of the things that is important to understand is that we are at a phase where we are engaging on policy proposals. There are documents that have been released by the ANC, and there will be a number of proposals coming from various leaders and structures of the ANC. And that is permitted because we are in a festival of ideas where we are debating, and we believe we'll find each other at a national policy conference next week. As the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal, we concur that we are entering into a second transition. In fact, it is a resolution that took at a provincial conference, and over the weekend, since yesterday and today, we are in a workshop where we're preparing ourselves for this policy conference. We believe that the past 18 years have been more important and have delivered freedom to our people. We've got a legitimate government which is governing based on the will of the majority of our country. We've created institutions that protect our country, our constitution, and the rights of everyone in South Africa. We've done with the mark in terms of transformation, changing the life of the people. But we believe that we must enter into a new gear and speed up transformation, in particular at the level of the economy. You will still appreciate the fact that the economy is still concentrated in the hands of a few. And the majority of our people are living in poverty.
Sure.
And they are marginalized.
But here's my problem, and I guess the problem by a lot of other people as well. The second most senior ANC official, if you will, says transitioning from what to what, and the language is not clear and so on. What do you make of that criticism?
I think we will find each other with the Deputy President and we will agree at the National Policy Conference that it is a transition from the first transition, and that first transition was characterized by the effort of putting democracy and institutions of government, as well as ensuring that we instill the culture of human rights and protection of human rights, and ensure that we start service delivery and transformation. So it is a transition from what we have put in place. But our main focus now should be on transforming the economy, in particular to ensure the inclusion of the poor, the marginalized people.
All right, let me bring back Aubrey again then. Do you find it odd that the second most senior ANC figure here doesn't understand what this whole transition is about?
No, I don't, because as I said, this is a discussion document.
All right.
And people are going to have different views about it. But certain things arise out of this debate. First of all, there are two questions that need to be asked. As a document, is the document on the second transition an articulation of sound theory?
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, does it describe an objective truth about the state of South Africa? So to the extent that you must ask what it is that ANC members are differing on and what it is there is convergence around, it seems to me all ANC members, let's say most ANC members, will agree that what the second transition document describes does represent an objective truth, to the extent that, yes, the first 2 decades of our democracy have delivered in procedural terms. The institutions are in place and the democratic rules are in place, and largely the democratic experience of the ordinary citizen is positive. But they will then turn around and say that in economic terms, the first 2 decades of our democracy have delivered very little, and therefore there is a gap between the procedural and the substantive as far as our democracy is concerned. But if you look at it as a piece of theory, I think conceptual differences have emerged amongst ANC members. Hence, the argument of the Deputy President that it's not clear what the document is saying about the nature of a transition, or whether there is a transition indeed. Because if you go back to 1969, at the Morogoro conference, when the ANC authored its strategy and tactics document, that 1969 strategy and tactics document spoke in terms of a transition from a global system of capitalism to a socialist international or global order. If you go back to the post-colonial period, you could have spoken about the transition from colonialism to independence on the continent. But even after independence, there was another transition from authoritarian rule to democratic rule. And that transition itself can be broken into two transitions. Hence, people tended to talk about the first wave and the second wave of democratization. And the question people are asking here is, in conceptual terms, what is the nature of the transition this document is talking about, And is there indeed a transition happening? And you'll also have to look at global forces, or the global balance of forces, and ask whether in qualitative terms, is the world changing? And are the shifts significant in scope and depth? And therefore, it seems to me that we should look at this discussion document, firstly, as an intellectual project, and secondly, as a political project. Now, as a political project, some of the differences have occurred because people are positing proxy arguments in favor of their political and leadership preference. And if you look at the things that have been happening, disruptions of national events arising from internal ANC battles, if you look at ANC leaders delivering so-called lectures, when in fact these lectures are nothing but an excuse to insult political enemies in the ANC, and therefore doing a disservice to the memory of the stalwarts in whose name they deliver these lectures. If you look at the fact that the ANC is able to go out to march against the spear as an assault on the dignity of black people, but not enough of a focus there was not enough focus on the fact that some of the failures of the ANC in health, in education, and elsewhere are themselves an assault on the dignity of black people. So all of that is indicative of an organization that is in a state of qualitative decline. And as I said, if the slates and the factionalism continues, whatever is decided in Mangaung or at the policy conference will come to naught, because the ANC will not be the vehicle through which we can meet our challenges as a nation.
And Professor Figeni, of course, over the weekend reported bust-ups at special NEC leadership, calling each other names and so on. It adds to what Aubrey say.
Actually, there is nothing as dramatic as what you have just heard now from the Provincial Secretary of KZN, saying that the Deputy President, we hope, will bring him along. It's unprecedented, because he ought to have been in the center of some of these policy discussions, even at their draft form. That he is outside and raising issues is indicative precisely of the point that Aubrey is making. And if you look at the post-colonial experience of liberation movements in Africa, the problem we have not done thorough comparative analysis with South Africa is because the notion of South African exceptionalism has denied us an opportunity to look at what happened to liberation movements after 20, 25 years. They decline, after which they either reinvent themselves with programs that improve the lives of people, or they use authoritarian means to stay on power.